My name is Madison, and I'm 32 years old. For 15 years, my life was a fortress of silence. No calls, no visits, no shared holidays. I built a career, a reputation, and eventually a $3.2 million estate deep in the Pacific Northwest rainforest, all without my mother or sister knowing I even existed. The silence wasn't empty. It was the foundation I built everything on. And then, at 9 a.m., on a Tuesday, the intercom at my security gate buzzed. I looked at the high-definition monitor in my kitchen and saw something impossible. A U-Haul truck. Standing next to it were my mother, Jennifer, and my sister, Ashley. They weren't holding gift baskets or apologies. They were holding suitcases. Ashley looked at the camera lens as if she owned it, pointing at the gate like it was a malfunction she expected me to fix. 15 years of peace, shattered by a single electronic hum. Before I tell you exactly what they screamed into the intercom, after a decade and a half of silence, drop a comment and let me know. What is the longest you've ever gone without speaking to a toxic family member? I want to see if I'm the only one. I didn't run to the front door. I didn't tremble. I simply tapped the microphone icon on the wall-mounted tablet next to my espresso machine. My voice didn't need to travel through the air. It traveled through fiber optics, stripping away any warmth before it reached them at the end of the driveway. I didn't ask how they found me. I didn't ask why they were there. I didn't ask how they had been. I pressed the button and said 4 words. You are trespassing. Leave. On the high-definition screen, I saw my mother, Jennifer, flinch. She looked at the intercom box as if it had slapped her. She was wearing a beige cardigan that probably cost more than my first car, clutching her purse with a white-knuckled grip that I remembered from my childhood. It was the grip she used when she was losing control of a narrative. She leaned into the camera, her face filling the frame, distorted by the wide-angle lens. Madison? Stop playing games, she said, her voice tinny through the speaker. The keypad isn't accepting the code. Just buzz us in. Your sister has had a terrible morning. She spoke as if 15 years hadn't happened. She spoke as if I were still 17, standing in the kitchen waiting for instructions. It was a fascinating display of delusion. She honestly believed that her presence was a master key that would unlock any door I built. I didn't release the lock. I zoomed in on the image instead. Behind her, Ashley was leaning against the U-Haul, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look like someone in crisis. She looked like someone waiting for room service. When the gate didn't open, she finally looked up, shielding her eyes from the gray Pacific Northwest drizzle. Madison, seriously? Ashley shouted, her voice shrill. I was unfairly evicted this morning. The landlord is a total nightmare. I have nowhere else to go, and Mom said you have, 5 empty bedrooms in there. Just open the gate so we can unload. There it was. The entitlement? It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. She wasn't asking for sanctuary. She was demanding a resource. In her mind, my house wasn't my home. It was just a storage unit for her baggage that happened to come with a roof. I leaned closer to the microphone. I am not a hotel, Ashley, and I am not your backup plan. This is private property. You are not on the guest list. You are not welcome. We are your family, Jennifer screamed, abandoning the pretense of politeness. You can't leave your sister on the street. That is cruel. I raised you better than this. You didn't raise me, I replied, my pulse steady, my voice flat. You survived me, and I survived you. The gate stays closed. You have exactly 5 minutes to turn that truck around before I call local law enforcement to report an intrusion. I released the button, cutting off their audio. I could still see them, though. I watched Jennifer mouth the word selfish at the camera. I watched Ashley kick the tire of the U-Haul. I stood in my glass kitchen, surrounded by the ferns and the silence, and I felt absolutely nothing but the cool, smooth surface of the marble counter under my palms. They thought they were negotiating with a daughter. They didn't realize they were arguing with a landlord who had already evicted them a decade and a half ago. I didn't watch them drive away. I walked back to my drafting table, where a blueprint for a healing garden was spread out, waiting for my attention. But the adrenaline was still humming in my veins, a low-frequency vibration that made it impossible to focus on topography lines. I realized I needed to explain this to myself, not to them. I needed to remember why the gate remained locked. It wasn't because I hated them. Hate is active. Hate requires energy. What I felt was the quiet necessity of a gardener pruning a diseased limb. You don't cut the branch because you're angry at the tree. You cut it because the rot will spread. You cut it because if you don't, the whole thing dies. 15 years ago, I was 22, freshly graduated with a degree in landscape architecture and $60,000 in debt. I was working 3 jobs, designing small patio gardens by day, bartending at night, and freelance drafting on weekends. I was exhausted, but I was building something. And every month, like clockwork, Jennifer would call with a crisis. Ashley needed bail money. Ashley needed a car repair. Jennifer needed help with the rent because she'd spent her paycheck on a business opportunity that turned out to be a pyramid scheme. I gave them everything. I drained my savings account 3 times in 2 years. I ate instant noodles so they could have steak. And when I finally landed my first major contract, a $450,000 commission to redesign a corporate campus, I made the mistake of telling them, "We're rich," Ashley had squealed. Not, "You're rich. We." Within a week, Jennifer sent me a list of debts she expected me to clear. Ashley sent me links to luxury apartments she wanted me to co-sign for. They didn't see my success as a result of my hard work. They saw it as a lottery win they were entitled to share. When I said no, when I told them I needed that money to start my own firm, to pay my own debts, to build my own future, they didn't just get angry. They got vicious. They called my clients. They spread rumors that I was unstable. They tried to burn down the very career that would have eventually supported them if they had just been patient. So, I pruned. I changed my number. I moved to a different city. I built a firewall around my life so thick that not even a smoke signal could get through. And in that silence, I thrived. I built this estate not as a monument to my ego, but as a testament to what happens when you stop pouring your energy into a black hole. I looked out the window at the ferns, swaying in the rain. This wasn't cruelty. This was photosynthesizing. I had removed the shade so I could finally find the sun. And now that I had grown into a towering tree, they wanted to chop me down for firewood. I wasn't going to let them. I picked up my stylus and returned to the blueprint. The garden needed a retaining wall. I knew exactly how to build one. I glanced back at the monitor. 5 minutes had passed. The U-Haul hadn't moved. In fact, the situation was escalating in a way that was both horrifying and academically fascinating. Ashley was no longer leaning against the truck. She was performing. She had set up a ring light. Where had she even pulled that from? On the hood of the U-Haul, and was speaking animatedly into her phone, gesturing wildly at my gate. I tapped the screen to unmute the audio feed from the external cameras. The sound of rain was drowned out by Ashley's voice, projected with the theatrical cadence of someone who knows they are live on social media. "Guys, I am literally shaking right now," she cried, wiping a tear that I was 90% sure was just raindrops. "My own sister, who is a multimillionaire, by the way, has locked me out in the rain. I have nowhere to go. I was evicted this morning, and she won't even open the gate. This is what money does to people. It turns them into monsters." Jennifer was pacing in the background, screaming at the stone wall as if sheer volume could disintegrate the mortar. "This is grandparent alienation," she shrieked. a term she had clearly picked up from a Facebook group without understanding its meaning, given that I had no children. We have rights. You can't keep us out. We are family. Then came the rocks. It started with Jennifer picking up a handful of driveway gravel and flinging it impotently at the steel bars. It was pathetic, but the intent was violent. Ashley filmed it all, narrating the assault as a desperate act of survival. I watched them, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I didn't feel the urge to rush out and soothe them, to apologize for existing, to fix the problem just to make the noise stop. Instead, I felt a detached curiosity. I was witnessing a textbook case of narcissistic injury. They weren't screaming because they were hurt. They weren't screaming because they missed me. They were screaming because I had removed their supply. For years, I had been their mirror, reflecting back an image of themselves as superior, deserving, and entitled to my labor. By closing the gate, I had shattered that mirror. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the void where their control used to be, and it terrified them. Ashley paused her live stream to pick up a larger rock, a decorative river stone from the landscaping border. She hurled it with surprising force. It clanged against the metal gate, chipping the paint. "Open it," she screamed, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. "You think you're better than us? You're nothing without us. You hear me? Nothing." I took a sip of my cold espresso. They were trying to break in, not to find shelter, but to reclaim their property. Me. And the rage I was seeing on the screen wasn't the desperation of the homeless. It was the fury of the owner whose appliance has stopped working. I reached for the tablet again. I didn't turn on the microphone this time. I didn't engage. I simply captured a clip of the rock throwing, saved the live stream recording, and logged the time. 9:17 a.m. The siege had begun, but the castle walls were holding, and for the first time in my life, I was on the right side of the gate. I turned away from the monitors. The time for observation was over. The time for execution had begun. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt the cold, familiar clarity of a project manager assessing a site hazard. They were no longer my mother and sister. They were liabilities, unmitigated risks. And in my business, you don't argue with risks, you eliminate them. I walked into my home office, a room soundproofed against the storms, and placed my hand on the biometric scanner of my wall safe. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, next to the deeds and the bonds, sat a black binder I had labeled Protocol 15. I had named it that not just for the 15 years of silence, but for the 15 minutes it would take to dismantle their entire offensive if they ever dared to show up. I had drafted it 5 years ago, the day I bought the land. I knew, with the certainty of a botanist who knows weeds always return, that they would come. It wasn't paranoia, it was forecasting. I pulled out the binder and my phone. I didn't call the police first. I called Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling wasn't a family friend. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit who specialized in high asset protection and restraining orders. I paid him a significant retainer to ensure that when I called, he didn't ask how I was feeling. He asked what I needed destroyed. "Madison," he answered on the first ring. His voice was gravel and precision. "They're here," I said, putting him on speaker as I sat at my desk. "Gate 3. Attempted entry. Property damage. Harassment. They're live streaming the intrusion. Are you safe? I'm inside. The perimeter is secure. Good. Initiate the packet. I'm dispatching the sheriff's deputies to your location now. They have the standing file on your mother. Do you want to press charges for the damage to the gate?" "Yes," I said. "Criminal mischief and trespassing. I want it on record. Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork ready by noon. Don't engage verbally unless you are serving the notice. Record everything. Understood. I hung up and turned to my computer. Ashley was still live, screaming about how I had stolen her inheritance. A fascinating claim, considering our father had died penniless, and I had built my wealth from zero. I didn't report the video. I downloaded it. I saved it to 3 separate cloud drives. She thought she was building a case against me in the court of public opinion. In reality, she was providing geolocated, time-stamped video evidence of her own crimes for a court of law. I opened the binder. Inside was a stack of documents already drafted, waiting only for a date. The cease and desist, the notice of no trespass, the affidavit of estrangement. I pulled them out, the paper crisp and heavy in my hands. I picked up a pen and wrote today's date at the top of each page. My handwriting didn't shake. Then I printed the communication logs, not from today, but from the last month. The ignored emails, the blocked calls. I compiled a dossier that proved this wasn't a family spat. It was a siege. I slid the documents into a thick manila envelope and sealed it. It sat on my mahogany desk, looking innocuous. It wasn't. It was a legal landmine. I stood up and smoothed the front of my silk blouse. I wasn't a trembling daughter hiding in the attic. I was the CEO of my own life, and I had just finished the paperwork for their termination. Protocol 15 was active. The printer hummed, spitting out the final pages of the legal packet. But my computer screen flickered with a new notification. It wasn't from Mr. Sterling. It was from the automated background check service I kept on a retainer, a standard practice in my line of work for vetting contractors. But today, I had pointed it at my own blood. I opened the file, expecting to see a judgment for unpaid rent or a credit card default. That would have fit the narrative of the desperate, evicted sister sobbing at my gate. But as I scrolled through the digital report, the narrative didn't just crack, it evaporated. There was no eviction record. There was no lawsuit from a landlord. There was, however, a very recent, very active listing on a popular vacation rental site. I clicked the link. The page loaded, showing professional photos of Ashley's evicted apartment. The title read, "Chic Downtown Loft, available for 6-month sublet. Move-in ready." I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. The listing had been posted 3 weeks ago. It was fully booked, starting tomorrow. The estimated income for the 6-month period was $18,000. I kept digging. I accessed her public Venmo history. She never was smart enough to make it private. 2 days ago, a transaction for $6,000 to a luxury travel agent. The memo was a single airplane emoji and a palm tree. I pieced it together with the precision of a forensic accountant. Ashley wasn't homeless. She wasn't a victim of a cruel landlord or a bad economy. She had voluntarily sublet her own apartment to fund a luxury sabbatical in Bali. She had cashed out her own shelter for a vacation, banking on the absolute certainty that she could manipulate me into housing her for free in the meantime. The U-Haul outside wasn't filled with the tragic remnants of a ruined life. It was filled with the clothes she didn't want to put in storage. I looked at the monitor, showing the driveway. Ashley was still performing for her phone, wiping away fake tears, telling her followers she was terrified of sleeping on the street. It was a masterclass in grift. She had monetized her own manufactured crisis. A cold laugh escaped me, startling in the quiet room. This changed everything. Until this moment, a tiny, treacherous part of me had wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe she really was in trouble. Maybe she really was desperate. But this wasn't desperation. This was a calculated raid. She didn't want a sister. She wanted a free storage unit and a zero-cost hotel so she could preserve her travel fund. I printed the rental listing. I printed the flight confirmation receipt I found linked to her email, a shared family account she forgot I still had access to. I printed the Venmo transaction. I stacked these papers on top of the cease and desist. The weight of the envelope felt different now. It wasn't just a legal shield anymore. It was a weapon. I wasn't just defending my peace. I was exposing a fraud. I checked the time. The sheriff's deputies were 4 minutes away. That gave me exactly enough time to deliver the news myself. I picked up the envelope. I didn't feel like a victim hiding in a glass tower. I felt like a judge walking into a courtroom to deliver a verdict that was long overdue. The grift ended today. I slipped on my rain jacket and stepped out of the front door. The air was thick with mist, carrying the scent of damp cedar and wet stone. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I walked down the long, winding driveway with the measured pace of a property owner inspecting her perimeter. The gravel crunched under my boots, a rhythmic, grounding sound that echoed in the quiet forest. As I rounded the final bend, the gate came into view. Through the steel bars, I could see them. They spotted me instantly. The transformation in their body language was immediate and pathetic. Jennifer straightened her spine, smoothing her cardigan, her face arranging itself into a mask of benevolent forgiveness. Ashley lowered her phone, though she didn't stop recording. A smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, the satisfied, preening look of a toddler who has just screamed loud enough to get the candy bar. They thought I was coming to open the gate. They thought the pressure had worked. They thought I was walking down here to apologize, to grovel, to pay the toll for their love. I knew you'd come to your senses, Jennifer called out as I approached, her voice dripping with triumphant pity. It takes a big person to admit they were wrong, Madison. We're ready to forgive you. Ashley laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. About time. My phone is literally at 10%. Do you have a charger inside? And I hope you have food. I'm starving. I stopped exactly 1 foot from the gate. I didn't reach for the keypad. I didn't reach for the latch. I stood there, looking at them through the rain-slicked bars, studying them like invasive species that had failed to take root. Up close, without the filter of a camera lens, they looked smaller, desperate, grimy. You're not coming in, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the silence of the rainforest, it carried like a gunshot. Jennifer's smile faltered. What? I didn't come down here to open the gate, I continued, sliding the thick manila envelope through the narrow gap between the bars. It landed with a heavy, wet slap on the asphalt at Ashley's feet. I came down here to serve you. Ashley looked at the envelope, then back at me, her smirk curdling into confusion. What is this? That, I said, pointing at the packet, is a printout of the vacation rental listing for your evicted apartment. It's fully booked for the next 6 months. It also contains the receipt for the $6,000 you sent to a luxury travel agent yesterday for a trip to Bali. The color drained from Ashley's face so fast, she looked like she might faint. She scrambled to pick up the envelope, tearing it open. Her eyes scanned the top page, the screenshot of her own Venmo transaction. I know you aren't homeless, I said, my voice cold and precise. I know you sublet your place to fund a vacation, and I know you came here today because you thought I was a free storage unit you could bully into submission. Jennifer snatched the papers from Ashley's hands. As she read, her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. The narrative of the poor, destitute daughter evaporated in the gray light. And underneath that, I added, is a formal cease and desist order along with a notice of no trespass. You have exactly 3 minutes before the sheriff's deputies arrive to arrest you for criminal mischief and attempted extortion. They have copies of the live stream you just posted. Ashley dropped the papers. She looked at the gate, then at the road, panic finally replacing the entitlement in her eyes. You called the cops? I called my lawyer, I corrected. He called the cops. You have 2 minutes and 45 seconds. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then, the reality of the situation crashed down on them. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a legal event. Ashley scrambled backward toward the U-Haul, slipping on the wet pavement. Jennifer looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with a horror that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with consequences. "Madison, please," she whispered. "Get off my property," I said. They ran. It wasn't a dignified exit. It was a scramble of slamming doors and grinding gears. The U-Haul reversed erratically, taking out a rhododendron bush before peeling out onto the main road. I stood at the gate and watched them disappear around the bend, the silence rushing back in to fill the space they had left. I didn't feel sad. I felt the profound, heavy satisfaction of a verdict delivered. The gate was still locked, and I was the one holding the key. I watched until the taillights of the U-Haul disappeared completely, swallowed by the mist and the winding road. The engine noise faded, replaced by the steady, rhythmic drumming of the rain on the canopy above. The forest exhaled. The tension that had tightened the air for the last hour dissipated, leaving behind a profound stillness. 10 minutes later, the sheriff's deputy arrived. It was a short, uneventful conversation. He took my statement, collected the flash drive with the video evidence, and assured me that a report for criminal trespass and mischief would be filed by the end of the day. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't look at me with pity. He treated it like what it was, a security breach that had been neutralized. When his cruiser pulled away, I was finally alone. I turned and began the walk back up the driveway. The gravel was wet and dark, the ferns vibrant green against the gray sky. I walked slowly, feeling the cold air against my face, letting the adrenaline drain out of my system. Reaching the top of the hill, I looked up at my house. The glass walls reflected the trees and the clouds, blending into the landscape. It wasn't a fortress to keep people out. It was a sanctuary to keep peace in. For years, I had wondered if I was wrong to guard it so fiercely. I had wondered if the price of this solitude was too high. But today, standing in the rain, I realized the truth. The cost of admission to my life isn't DNA. It isn't history. The cost of admission is respect. It is the ability to bring water to the garden, not just take the fruit. Jennifer and Ashley didn't want to help me tend the soil. They just wanted to harvest what they hadn't planted. I stepped inside and locked the door. The sound of the heavy bolt sliding home wasn't a sound of fear. It was the sound of a promise kept. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I watched the steam rise, listening to the soft hiss of the water boiling. I made a cup of tea and sat in the living room, looking out through the floor to ceiling windows at the storm passing over the valley. This is the justice of the sower. True victory isn't about watching your enemies suffer or fail. It isn't about the dramatic confrontation at the gate or the legal threats. Those are just weeds you have to pull. The real victory is what grows in the space you cleared. It's the quiet morning coffee. It's the work that fulfills you. It's the safety of knowing that the only energy in your home is the energy you invited. My mother and sister were out there somewhere, driving a U-Haul back to a reality they had tried to outrun. They were still trapping themselves in cycles of grift and blame. I wasn't part of that cycle anymore. I was just the gardener, sitting in the center of the world I had built, watching the rain nourish the roots of my life. I took a sip of tea. It was warm. It was quiet. It was mine. If this story reminded you of a door you need to close, share this video. You never know who needs permission to protect their peace today.